Well, all right. We're back. It's another edition of Sunday Night AstroLive. What's happening, everybody? It's me, Robert Phoenix, and boy, am I psyched. We're going to have Doctor Longo back in his house tonight. That's right. We're going to have the man himself. He's just winding up a long weekend where he's, I guess, interfacing with the public. It's kind of a civic event they do down there in Florida, and apparently it's a really great 3 days for his bookshop that he and his brother own and operate. I'm sure some of you have been down there and checked out the digs, and we'll catch up with him, and we'll find out more about what's happening in bookshop world and publishing world on the Longo side when he shows up on these shores. Ah, there he is, almost right on time. That was great timing. Anyway, as soon as he beams back in, we'll bring him aboard, and I just want to welcome you to tonight's show. The overall theme here is Pisces, Atlantis, and Florida. And I know Longo's done a lot of really great work on the Florida and Atlantis kind of aspect of things. You know, I think one time before we had a show, it was during Pisces season. And, you know, we were playing around with Venus, Florida, Jupiter, Florida, Neptune, Florida, and all the astrological sort of Piscean symbolism that's associated with the state of Florida. Of course, Florida itself is a Piscean state. That's when it was inaugurated. So here we are again. In fact, when we were talking about putting this show together, I said, you know, I think when we did this, we also did this during Pisces season. Well, we did a show during Pisces. This is where we really got into this. So this is the last time Neptune will be in Pisces during Pisces season. So by this time next year, there will be no more Neptune in Pisces. You know, all this started in 2011, and really just on the heels of Fukushima. Fukushima happens on 3/11/2011, and less than 10 days later, Neptune is in Pisces. Less than a day later, Uranus is in Aries. So one of the things that happens during a Neptune cycle, which is a 15-year cycle, is there are two shifts of Uranus that happen in or around that Neptune cycle. So here, what we've seen primarily, I mean, if you want to be kind of, exact about it, Uranus doesn't really go into Aries. Right, it goes into Aries, but it doesn't. There's like the timing is just slightly off a bit, right? But it does go from Pisces to Aries, right? It does happen, and so we have Neptune in Pisces, then Uranus in Aries, and then it goes through this other phase in 2020 where Uranus goes into Taurus. So we've had these two Uranian cycles of Aries and Taurus, which I'm going to talk about tonight. And then the next Neptune cycle that we'll be going through, Neptune and Aries, will have two Uranus cycles inside of it. The first will be Uranus in Gemini, and then the last one will be Uranus in Cancer. So some of this is looking back at those periods of time, the 2011 period, specifically. And I think it's really interesting that, there were people who were kind of excavating around this idea of ancient civilizations. When I was a kid, I watched Eric von Däniken in Chariots of the Gods. I think it might have been about, 12 or 13 years old, and, totally flipped my way, and really sort of, as a kid, I went into that, started to, try to find as much sources of ancient history as possible, which was not that easy to find. People like Charles Berlitz were around, and some other folks that were writing about these sorts of things. So it's always been around, but there was a major uptick in trying to understand this whole phenomena, like, what we call Tartaria, or these ancient civilizations, of which, of course, Longo talks about. That wasn't the general discussion around this stuff was not always around. it was not as ubiquitous. There are so many YouTube channels now that are looking at things like brick and melt and all these other kind of amazing phenomena. And of course, that's how I eventually stumbled across Longo, because YouTube had seen that I was really consuming a lot of this material. It's like, well, here, what about this channel? So that's how our paths crossed. And I feel like if we were to go back to 2011, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about this, right? There wasn't a whole lot of people scouring around and go, why does this happen? Why is this building submerged halfway beneath the land and nobody's talking about it? Oh, what is this thing on top of these old buildings? And, why are they there? Right? Like, why? So this is all a pretty recent phenomena. And I would say, really, if you go back and start to track Uranus and Aries, because Aries is a very pioneering energy. Aries is always kind of setting out to discover, like, what's across the Great Divide, right? And so this Aries energy, this Uranus and Aries energy, I think really kickstarted this idea that there have been other civilizations and perhaps even other timelines that have been associated with this domain that we're living in. And again, it all sort of kicks off with Neptune and Pisces as well, right? Because it's what we can imagine. It's what we can begin to perceive on some sort of, perhaps wherever you are, right? Because for some people, this idea of Tartaria sounds very idyllic, right? Like they were polluting ether from the atmosphere and they were doing all these things that were lined up on all these grids, and seems a lot more technologically sophisticated than perhaps where we are now. So there's a lot of projection that also goes on in this area of ancient history, ancient study, Tartaria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of belief systems and a lot of like personal perceptions are sort of shot through that lens, which to me is very Neptune and Pisces. Like you'll kind of be a witness to it and see it based on, to some extent, what your ideas of things like, I don't know, Eden, Nirvana, utopia, right? Sort of this kind of more holistic world that's not, theoretically fallen, right? But there are other people who don't see it that way. There are researchers who believe that there is like that world fell because it was evil, right? And that's another kind of perception of Pisces. When we talk about Pisces, we talk about this wide, very, very wide aperture of duality. Some of it is just like, it's pure Godhead, and we're in bliss, and we're rejoined with this supernal oneness, and then you go all the way down to the bottom, and you're in the bowels of hell, and you're not going to get out until whatever, right? And then there's a whole lot in between, which is really what the journey of Pisces is about. It's the root to the fruit. So I think we're going to get Longo's sort of version of Florida Atlantis, and we'll talk a lot more about Pisces. I've got some charts set up. One of the things that I found interesting, because I've been looking at these, like the last days of Neptune and Pisces, like through these various cycles, and the Civil War starts in 1861, and that's when Neptune moves into Aries, and that's what's going to happen. We're going to have Neptune move into Aries, and Saturn is going to be kind of right there, doing this fiery tango between these two luminaries, and that's, so we're lining up to the Civil War aspect with Neptune and Aries, right? So I was looking at like what was going on just before that happened. So if you go back perhaps a year before that, which we will, going back to 1860, Pisces is a sign that's associated with drugs as well, right? I would say if you had to go signs of drugs, Pisces, and then Scorpio right below it. Scorpio with the addiction, the obsessive compulsive addiction stuff, right? Deep narcosis. But Pisces has always been connected to drugs. So what's happened? What's happened since Neptune was in Pisces? Well, we went to, well, clearly we were in Afghanistan where they grow opium, poppies, right? And that all started before Neptune went in Pisces, but clearly we were still, but there was a major shift that took place. And the shift was the creation of first OxyContin, which is a derivative of morphine, and then after that, fentanyl. So these two incredibly powerful drugs, the drugs that are probably maybe just outside of methamphetamine, those three are the three drugs, but those two in particular really sort of hit the streets under Neptune and Pisces and really began to turn our world, our societies, our communities inside out, right? So drugs have always been associated with Pisces, and during this Neptune and Pisces are two of the most devastating drugs that we've encountered, with maybe the exception of meth. And back in the day, crystal crystal PCP was, the problem with PCP, right, is it was just so crazy. Well, I guess meth and fentanyl is crazy, but PCP just wasn't gonna. It doesn't take away pain. See, that's the thing with PCP. It just helps you inflict pain on others. But that's why I don't think it's really advanced through the highlights of pharmacopoeia. But yeah, I mean, Neptune and Pisces has brought us to the most devastating drugs. These are drugs. This is not propaganda, which is a drug, right? This is not the internet, which is a drug. This is not porn, which is a drug. I mean, all those things are addictive. And we're talking just about drugs in general. Well, guess what happened? In 1860, I'm going to show you guys something right here. In 1860, we had, let's go right down here. In 1860, we had, date unknown, the discovery of cocaine. This is right at the end of Neptune and Pisces. Albert Nyman makes a detailed analysis of the cocoa leaf and purifying the alkaloid, which he calls cocaine. So that's at the end of Neptune and Pisces in this previous cycle, leading up to the Civil War. So drugs are a common theme when we talk about Neptune and Pisces. All right, so why don't we do this? Let me just get my sponsorship out of the way here, and then we'll bring on the good doctor. So let me do this. And by the way, welcome to the show, Tartaria. Good to see everybody in here representing. I think we're simul streaming tonight over on Longo's World. So let's do this. Let me just bring up a little True Hemp Science, and we'll give our guy Chris, speaking of drugs. Now, these are good drugs. We like these drugs. These are the drugs that improve the quality of our lives. So here you go, True Hemp Science. And if you go there, you can check out all of Chris's great CBD and CBN and CGA products. You get hints of THC. This stuff is incredible, really incredible. He's a master chemist. And then all you got to do is buy $100 or more, type in 15MINS, and you'll get a goodie bag with your order. So it's like the Whitman sampler. And there are a number of people in chat who use the product. If you have any questions about it, ask them, and they'll testify. They got some pet sounds for your pet. So this is good stuff. $150 or more gets you a free shipping, and there's always a 30-day money-back guarantee over at True Hemp Science. All right. Don't forget to hit the like, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And let's bring on the man of the moment, the one and only Dr. Longo. What's going on, brother?
Mr. Phoenix, great to see you again, man.
Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to have you on over here. So tell us about your weekend, and how much of a success was it interfacing with the public and spreading the gospel?
I've been okay. I've been good. not as productive on YouTube because we're working on a book right now.
Right.
Publishing a book about Florida and the Garden of Eden.
Right.
Here at the bookstore this weekend, we had the Lake Worth Beach Street Painting Festival, and this is actually kind of relevant. It's always the same time of year, and the Pisces Aquarius cusp, which I thought was interesting.
Yep.
But this is the biggest draw to our town in the whole year, and we have a Finnish festival too in March. Finnish fish, the whole Finnish connection,
and the fin in fish as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you have the street painting festival. They say over 100,000 people. One time they said 500,000 people. So it's a lot of people come, and busiest time of the year for us at the store. So I was up on my feet the last couple of days, but I'm okay. I can't complain. It was a good time.
So when you say street painting, is this chalk art, or these people, do they have easels and canvas and watercolor acrylics? What's it look like?
It's mostly chalk, because what they do is they close the street, the main drag in our downtown area, and they let all these artists just chalk on the street, and they each kind of get like a 10-foot by 10-foot section.
Right.
They'll get sponsored by a local business or a charity or something like that. And they'll paint a whole thing, and sometimes it rains, so they'll just start fresh the next day. But it's kind of very lax, like not very, people aren't dumping their soul into like some people do, but they don't care if it rains. It's kind of like the beauty of it a little bit.
Right.
And it's a lot of like superheroes, kind of gimmicky cartoon art, a lot of it, but there's some really good stuff too.
Some of the 3D stuff is really mind-blowing, when they put perspective in it and everything. It's like, whoa, look at that. Yeah,
that's a big thing they do, is the optical where you have to stand in a certain place to see it all come together.
Right.
A couple of those out there. It's cool. If anyone's never been to Lake Worth, Florida, it's the sister city, next door city to Palm Beach Island. Right, there's West Palm Beach, Beach. We're kind of right across the water from Palm Beach Island here.
Yeah, cool. I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you about your publishing company. So you have a book on the Garden of Eden in Florida coming out, and has the Giordano Bruno book been published, or is that what you're also working on as well?
Not quite yet. We just went on pre-sale, right?
Okay.
So we're looking to have that out very shortly. In the beginning is going to be closer to, that's the Garden of Eden in Florida book. In the beginning is going to be closer to April or May, probably.
Yeah.
But that's going to be our third book. We're on our second book now, which is Giordano Bruno, and by Francis Yates. And those first two, that's almost entirely my brother's doing. I've had very minimal input. Like, that's my brother's passion project. Him and his friend Tony, they are, knocking home runs with those two. And I couldn't be more proud. Monad was Neoplatonic philosophy. Giordano Bruno, he's considered like the last Renaissance man, the last kind of real alchemist, you could say, or, Da Vinci type figure. He was a poet, philosopher too, and a astronomer, astrologer too, very.
He was a Renaissance guy. He was checking all the boxes, and he was a heretic. He was a heretic as well.
Yeah, burned at the stake.
Yep.
We've got this artwork here that my brother commissioned. Giordano Bruno being burned at the stake.
Oh yeah, a little block cut art there. I like it.
Yeah. And so that book, people can go pre-order now if they'd like to. There's only going to be about 2,000 or so printed.
Where can they find your books?
Gallo Glass Publishing.
Okay.
Or Gallo Glass Books. We're the publisher. Gallo Glass Books is how you find us.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure to put a link in for folks with the show notes. So I'm sure you can throw that in there in the chat as well.
You can go to galloglassbooks.shop. It's a direct link.
Right.
You can also come on into the Dancing Elephant bookstore if you're in Florida anytime soon.
And these are the great thing about this. These are physical print copies. These are things you hold, you read, you turn the page, right? And
yes,
yeah,
beautiful. Yep, hardcover, acid-free paper. You can pass these down through the family. Really, these are quality pieces of work. The artwork is entirely original. So
I'm proud of you, Longo. I'm proud of you.
Well, I'm proud of my brother. In the beginnings is going to be kind of where I come up to bat on this, but those two, my brother chose the material,
right,
and saw it through from start to finish. So
cool.
Yeah. Gallo Glass Publishing.
Good deal. All right. Well, make sure people can go over there and find that. Yeah. So before you got on, I think you might have heard maybe some of what I was talking about, and I was getting into a little bit of this sort of historical piece around kind of the last days of Pisces, which is, where we are. This is the last time we'll have Neptune in Pisces during Pisces season. Mm-hmm. So next year, when we're in Pisces season, we'll have Neptune in Aries. It's going to be a very different kind of animal. And I was just looking at these historical periods before Neptune goes from Pisces to Aries, and some of the things that go along with it. And one of the things that I discovered was cocaine. Cocaine was the alkaloid formula of cocaine was discovered in the final sort of stages of Neptune and Pisces. Wow. Of course, cementing itself as being part of the drug myth and drug lore and drug culture. And then over really since 2011, which is when Neptune went into Pisces, first we had OxyContin, and then of course fentanyl, which became the drug of choice on the streets, and even displacing opium and morphine. Again, Neptune and Pisces being part of the sort of the sort of the drug or the cocktail of Morpheus. And there's other places and other things that we can go and dive into. I got a bunch of charts, but where I really want to go and take advantage of your knowledge around this is I really wanted to dive in, pun not intended, or maybe with Atlantis and Florida and Pisces, because I communicated this to you when I was in Puerto Rico. I was looking at these islands, right? Like Puerto Rico, and then there's Cuba, and there's Jamaica, and over here there's the Virgin Islands. And what I realized is that they were probably all part of a landmass at one point, right? And then what had happened is that, we had this antediluvian sort of catastrophe, or whatever it was. And so what we're dealing with, I think, in those places are the outcroppings of the original Atlantis. Of course, those aren't very far from your home base in Florida. So you've done some stuff like this on your channel, and why don't we go there? Let's dive into these waters, Florida and Atlantis, and then we'll bring the Piscean part in.
Totally, that's good stuff. Number one, I gotta say, I love your new background. I love the neon, the brick wall or whatever. That's cool. It looks great, for real.
Thanks, man.
And also, for my audience, if you guys haven't seen The Death from Above, is that what you called that stream you did a week ago? Pluto?
Yeah.
Right, like the planes falling down?
Yeah, right.
That was a legendary stream, guys. Okay, legendary. Go check that one out if you haven't. The Death from Above.
Yeah.
Stream that Robert did a week or two ago. It's really, really good.
Thanks, man.
Of course. Atlantis, the Caribbean, totally. This is my bread and butter.
Yep.
I'd really draw our attention first to, what do the academic community, what do they say killed the dinosaurs?
The meteor, right, yeah.
And where did it land? On the tip of the Yucatan. Right. The tip of the Yucatan, pretty much. That largely, determined like the coastline of the Gulf of Mexico that we have today. Now they tell us that's like 50 million years ago or something, but
Right.
how the hell would they know? Something splashes down. Who knows?
Well, they have that, that carbon dating, which is indisputable, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. I
Yeah.
mean, they submit like a ballpoint pen from like the 21st century, comes back like 5,000 years old.
Right.
Like
Right.
happens all the time.
Yes. Yeah. Like testing a banana for COVID.
Yeah. So you've got the one that they say took out the dinosaurs. Okay, now we can take this all with a grain of salt. Maybe there was no dinosaurs. Maybe there was, whatever. But we know something came down there. A big, big, big impact. And some more evidence is that in places like Cuba, like you're mentioning, places like Haiti, you have extreme deposits of I don't know if this is the right word, but extraterrestrial minerals, basically minerals that are only come from the sky. Things like moldavite, I believe, comes down around there.
Right.
You also have iridium occurring naturally around different parts of the Caribbean, especially Haiti. And these are like markers for things falling from the heavens.
Interesting.
In the past.
Right.
And so up in the mountains of Haiti and Cuba, you find a lot of these rare trace minerals. So that's something where we see evidence of a great change in the Caribbean, and it's in the tops of the mountains. It's down near the water, so there might have been a lot of earth getting shuffled around back then. I do kind of ascribe to like a toilet bowl Gulf of Mexico model originally, where something blasted the Yucatan, the gap between the tip of Florida and the tip of the Yucatan. Something might have blasted that open.
Yeah.
Or it certainly was a lot thinner, that opening 10,000 years ago, which is what we'd call our Atlantis timeline, 11, 12,000 years ago. That's Plato's, timeline for Atlantis.
Right.
You do hear about, interestingly, there's no volcanoes, around Florida, but all you have to do is go a little bit farther down in the Caribbean. There's plenty of volcanoes. A lot of them are under the water too.
Right.
You have the trench over here too. I forget the name of the trench. There's a deep water trench, Cayman, near the Cayman Islands.
Right.
One of the deepest places in the world. People tend to think of the Gulf of Mexico as like a little kind of kiddie pool. And that certainly would have been a favorable place to exist, 10,000 years ago. There's no ice. The rest of the world's covered in ice. So the rest of the northern hemisphere is covered in ice. Florida remained ice-free through pretty much all of what we consider the ice ages. That's why there's all this limestone still there in Florida. In most of the northern hemisphere around the world, the surface limestone has been shaved clean and grinded away by consecutive glacial melts, drifts of the glaciers. They would scrape all the soft shell off of the coastal areas. That's where you get some of the more cliffy areas, right? Because naturally the water forms, the ocean forms like shelly beaches naturally, right? When you start seeing cliffs, you're seeing kind of the evidence of upheaval, you could say.
Yeah.
So Florida, you can look at the coastline. You can look at the 10,000 years ago coastline. 10,000 years ago or 11,600 years ago, Florida matches the dimensions given by Plato for Atlantis.
Interesting.
Plato said that the southern Great Plain of Atlantis was 3,000 stadia by 2,000 stadia. So north to south, 3,000 stadia. East to west, 2,000 stadia. That's the exact size of Florida.
So
11,000.
what is a unit of measurement for a stadia? Is that like a stadium, or what is that?
Mm-hmm. Stadia, I believe it's like close to a yard. Wait, no. That can't be right. That's not right. That's not right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what a stadia is. Okay.
Okay.
I know that it's 555 kilometers. 3,000 stadia is 555 kilometers. I know that much. Okay. So 3,000 stadia, 555 kilometers. 2,000 stadia is, 2/3 of that. So
the state. This is what, of course, AI is saying. That is a unit of measurement originated in ancient Greece. So the measurement here is up to 600 feet, and then there's another. Historians estimate that the stadium of the Olympic Games was 150 to 210 meters long. So I'm just going to throw this up on the screen for people, just so they can kind of get the measurement in there. This is what we're talking about. Of course, thank you, AI. What would we do without AI now? Oh my God, we'd be sunk. So if you added this up, and it's the exact same measurement of what Plato laid out.
Yeah, I do have a map. I do have a picture if people want to see that.
I think you can share a screen, can't you?
Yeah. Let me see what I got. Just give me a sec to pull that up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Here we go. So people can see for themselves. I've quoted Plato and I've laid out the measurements so people can follow along, test our math here. In the Atlanticus, or Timaeus and Critias, the two works about Atlantis that are attributed to Plato. Some people say they're older than Plato, but still. Plato is considered the original authority on the Atlantis myth. He's the originator of the Atlantis myth. That might not be true. He actually says the story he's getting is from the Egyptians. So we know at least it goes back before him to the Egyptians through his uncle or a friend's uncle named Solon.
Solon, that's right. Yeah.
But to quote either Critias or Timaeus, I forget. Florida's coastline per 11,600 years ago perfectly matches the dimensions given by Plato for the southern Great Plain of Atlantis. So, quote, extending in one direction 3,000 stadia, which is about 555 kilometers or 345 miles. But across the center inland, it was 2,000 stadia, about 370 kilometers or 230 miles. The dimensions given by Plato would translate into 370 by 555 kilometers, or 230 by 345 miles. And then Plato gives an additional description. The fertility of the plain gave the inhabitants 2 crops annually. There's not many places on Earth, 10,000 years ago or 10,000 years from now, that have ever been able to deliver 2 crops annually.
We know one of them is oranges.
Yeah.
Right.
And Florida, that's Florida is.
Right.
Also, you can look at this as you can go off of the animals that Plato named and say, okay, not only are we looking for a landmass with these dimensions, at least in part, the southern Great Plain, we're also looking for these dimensions, and they have to have horses and elephants. Horses and elephants 11,600 years ago. Not many places on Earth can produce those. Florida is teeming with ancient elephants, mastodon, mammoth, and elephant, prehistoric elephant, all in Florida, 11,600 years ago. These aren't your fake dinosaur bones. We can go find these in the rivers and the springs. We'll trip over them if we spend enough time splashing around. Everyone sees them. They're all over the place. Mammoth teeth, a giant sloth, but more importantly, ancient elephants and horse side by side.
What about the size of the equine? Were they as equally as large as the elephants, or are they more consistent with what we call the modern day horse?
Yeah, from what I've seen, they were a little smaller than the modern day horse.
Okay.
Or at least, some of the smaller breeds.
Right.
They'd be like that.
Right.
But,
so there we go. There's your measurements right there. Okay, maps out.
And the coastline, also, just so people can see what they're looking at, I took the scale and I laid it out so people can do the math on their own. And just so you can read this map, we're looking at the blue line. Make sense?
Yeah.
The blue line is 11,600 years ago. And so if we follow that blue line, you see I've got the scale measuring from blue to blue.
Right.
East to west. And then north to south is peninsular Florida. So the Florida Peninsula matches perfectly. And Florida was about twice as thick as it is now, 10,000, 11,000 years ago. So to me, this is I don't know if this is proof, but man, it's overwhelming evidence. I think so.
So if we extend that out to those areas that we were talking about, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Haiti. So is that also part of this? Were they part of one landmass at one point in time?
Maybe if we go far back enough. But the Straits of Florida, so beneath the Florida Keys, that's pretty much always been wet. That's pretty much always been ocean. Right. Now, the Yucatan came up higher, and Florida, you see, came down a little farther west. So they almost touched, right? The Bahamas, it's called the Bimini Shelf or the Bahamas Shelf. But
I think it's the Bimini Shelf.
Yeah, most of the Bahamas would have been a single landmass back then, a sizable island the size of maybe, Cuba or Puerto Rico or a little small.
Yeah. Right. Do you know that old Charles Berlitz story? Are you familiar with that?
Charles who?
So there was this guy named Charles Berlitz, Berlitz, and he's one of the modern purveyors of the Atlantean mythos, and not just from sort of like, well, I'm channeling. He was like a diver, and supposedly he had descended and found like the Bimini Wall, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's the structures that are around Bimini. They look just like, almost like a road, perhaps, right? Like pieces, big chunks of granite put together. Now, this could be just pure conjecture, but he claimed to have found the tip of a pyramid during a dive.
Yeah.
And at the top of the pyramid were these hands that came out, and then supposedly there was either a space for a crystal globe, or there was actually a crystal globe in these hands.
Yeah.
And then he went back another time, and apparently some weather had changed the conditions underneath the water. It wasn't able to prove his find, but what it did is it really accelerated this idea of Atlantis, and particularly in that part of the world. So you've run across that?
I have, yeah. I think I put him in one of my videos. He was a friend of Ernest Hemingway's brother, I believe. Yeah, they were both kind of looking for Atlantis at the same time, around the 60s or 70s, out near Bimini.
Yeah.
And the Fountain of Youth. So Atlantis, the Fountain of Youth, these myths kind of getting morphed into one. That kind of ties back to a movie that we talked about a couple nights ago. But to your question, I have heard about the tip of the pyramid. In my Sacks or Stones documentary, we actually talk to two guys who were they're friends of John Saxer's. They are they were part of the Edgar Casey research. What's this society name?
Aries.
ARE, thank you.
Yeah.
And they put a lot of money into ocean expeditions, looking for Atlantis. They're trying to validate the work of Edgar Casey.
Yeah.
And these two guys near Tarpon Springs is where they launched their boat off for that mission. And ever since, it's kind of been the Atlantis, boat that does Atlantis voyages, looking for Atlantis, evidence of Atlantis, whatever, diving. I interviewed two of the guys on that ship. The ship's called the Aqua Quest. Aqua Quest.
Right.
Okay. The Aqua Quest, I interviewed two of the guys on there. They both not only affirmed that story, that there is a pyramid, the tip of a pyramid sticking out of the sand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that also there was crystals down there that you could find some weird stuff.
Right.
And if people want to see that, in my Saxor Stones documentary, somewhere towards the middle, I interviewed two guys named Drywall Mike is one of them, and then Boo Boo is the other. So Drywall Mike and Boo Boo, they work on sites with John. They do like construction. None of this Atlantis stuff panned out in their favor, of course. Like they're all, kind of laborers to this day, which is, good. We need them. I trust those guys building houses and stuff. But
right.
But that Atlantis stuff never panned out for them. So they were not, they could go sell this story. They could be doing every podcast in the world. But I was in town. John Saxor convinced him to talk to me, and they both said, this is what we saw. And they said, oh yeah, we've got a friend who put out some YouTube videos. I went and checked out his YouTube videos. Pretty much nobody had ever watched them, a couple hundred views at most. And it was the behind the scenes of the Aqua Quest. I've got videos of them checking out that tip of the pyramid.
Right.
We have it on video. It's a very, it's a step pyramid with very skinny steps. And it comes up to a tip just poking out of the sand. And they were there. They were pulling sand off the top. They were trying to suck the sand out with a big tube, kind of vacuum thing. And they just left it alone. You can't. And believe it or not, yes, you can drop coordinates, but the sand, the sea floor is kind of ever changing.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Berletz was inferring, that what he had seen wasn't there by the time he got back. So yeah.
Yes. And I think the gentleman you're talking about who found the crystal ball, he calls it the Atlantis stone, and he actually has it. I believe this guy, it might not be the same guy. He has the crystal ball, and he shows people, and he does videos with it. He was just never able to go back and find where he found it. But
so let's give people just sort of a visual of Charles Berlitz.
Mm-hmm.
Born 11/22, 1914, and he's this is what he looks like right here. The Bermuda Triangle, Time bestseller, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this guy went all in. Look, I mean, he was sort of all over the place, right? Bermuda Triangle, Philadelphia experiment, Atlantis, Roswell incident. So this guy is who would be like, he was, I don't know, David Wilcock before David. Now he's got more gravitas than David Wilcock, I think. But he was one of these guys that was into, just offbeat research stuff that scientists wouldn't touch, right? That was his stock in trade. So there you go. There's Charles Berlitz.
If you'd share my screen, please, I'll show people the tip of the pyramid.
There it is, right there.
And we also have kind of GPS right here. Can you hear this?
That means it must
Yeah.
be
a lot older than anything on land because the sea levels change.
Yeah, sea level change, and we're working on pulling permits to dig
That's
on
the
it.
tip.
But we dug on it a little bit. Just
See that?
Yeah,
we
right there.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't come to a sharp angle. It's almost kind of like a step pyramid with like a pyramidal altar at the top.
Right. And then the question is, how deep does that go?
Yeah, I mean,
Underneath that sand.
Yeah, you'd have to pull away a lot of sand to see how big that is. And it's not the only one. People say that there's pyramids all over the Caribbean, especially Bahamas, off the coast of Jamaica.
Right.
And also the fact about Atlantis, according to others, being the place that sank down into the water, that was swallowed up by the seas. I mean, that happened in Jamaica in recent memory. They call it the Jamaican earthquake or a tsunami. Something happened and an entire portion of Jamaica was swallowed up into the sea. Paradise. I'm blanking. I'm trying to look it up right now. I can't find it, but it's one that really shook up the whole piracy game, because this is where they were all hanging out. All the pirates were hanging out at this one city in Jamaica, and they believed that since there was so many non-Christian pirates at this one place, there was so much human trafficking, there was so much sin and vice going on at this one pirate kind of getaway, a hangout spot, that they kind of say this is divine judgment, that this whole portion of Jamaica was sunken down into the sea. Port Royal, thank you guys, thank you subscribers.
Interesting.
Port Royal, Jamaica, if people want to look that up. It's a couple hundred years ago, but still within recent memory, we do have a significant landmass kind of getting sunken down into the sea or pulled under or swept away into the waves. But Port Royal,
well, that's interesting, because the whole pirate thing, if you go back to, what is it, it was, let's see, 1816, I believe it's 1690. Where's my history here? Let me just go back into this thing. If you go back far enough, you will find that during the previous Neptune and Pisces cycle, the end of that cycle is, again, really rife with the whole pirate theme.
Do you want to maybe, would it be interesting if we maybe did the astrology of the Port Royal earthquake?
Sure. Yeah.
That might be cool, right?
Let's tee it up. What, you got a date on it?
Port Royal earthquake. So it's around 11:43. I don't have an AM or PM, but I assume AM. 7th of June, 1692. Port Royal, Jamaica. They say it was a 7.7 magnitude.
Port Royal, Jamaica. What you said? Port Royal, Jamaica?
Yes.
All right. And let's go with, let's do like a high noon. Let's do that. All right.
They say 11:43 a.m. Yes.
Oh, so not. Yeah, okay, cool. Well, let's tweak it just a little bit, even more. Let's get it right there. Okay.
Are there any markers for earthquake, by the way, before we dig into it?
You mean in this chart? In this chart?
Well, just what are the astrological markers for earthquake?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Uranus is going to play a role with earthquakes,
Mhm.
right? Because it's disruptive,
Right.
and usually some kind of either square or opposition with something that would be kind of rooted or anchored to the earth. So let me bring this up because we're definitely in some interesting territory with this chart on a number of levels. So let's see.
Yeah, because I'm sure I know you've dug into the New Madrid earthquakes a lot and talked about the writing on the wall astrologically.
Yeah.
So Port Royal kind of had, didn't have that much of an effect, but it certainly.
So look here we go. We've got Neptune and Pisces, which is, again, by the time you get to the like 1699 is when Neptune and Pisces ends, right? It's just before it goes into Neptune and Aries. This is the date that I was actually looking for. These pirates start they start to go down, right? Like their reign starts to stop right around this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. We can throw up the timeline when we're done with this. But yeah, look, we've got Neptune and Pisces right here, right? The moon is also in Pisces. Now, of course, that's very transitory. But what is Neptune doing, right? It's squaring the sun. And that's sort of so you're going to get a Neptune square with, whether it's the sun is in Virgo or Gemini. Here it's in Gemini, right? And we also have Chiron, which is conjunct the sun. So a Chiron sun conjunction in Gemini is kind of unstable, right? It's fairly unstable. And it's coming in here and it's squaring off against Neptune, of course, in Pisces. So the water is going to be volatile and disruptive. Now, the earthquake stuff, you can see right here. We have Jupiter and Uranus conjuncting in Gemini. So what happens when you get a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction? Well, it just makes either, Uranus bigger or Jupiter more volatile.
Mm-hmm.
When you combine the two, and then you have the opposition here with Saturn. Now, Saturn is in Sagittarius. But its rulership is Capricorn, which is Earth, which you don't see a lot of here. I mean, look at this chart. What you are witnessing is the absence of Earth. So there's no anchoring going on in this chart at all, with the exception of the ascendant in Virgo. So this idea that part of an island could actually become submerged due to an excess of water, I could totally see this with this chart. Because there's nothing anchoring it. Zero, zilch, nada. And there's a lot of instability between these major planets, right? Super unstable. So it's fascinating.
Also, just to give some more context on this, we have that time, the 11:43 a.m. June 7th time, because there wasn't much left after the earthquake. There was not much left. This story's also been remembered and told because of its biblical parallels, because this pirate city, it was so kind of living in the moment, not thinking ahead. They didn't build any of their foundations on land. All of their building was built on sand. Right. So as soon as this earthquake came, not only would the waves have been bad, they also had liquefaction of the sand. That's literally pulled all the buildings down into the sand because they weren't built on firm ground. And we have that time of when it happened because there was a wristwatch, or a pocket watch, or a wristwatch that was found there that was frozen at that time. That's the date that we go off of. And then also, according to Wikipedia, known as the storehouse and treasury of the West Indies. So not just piracy, but treasure, we're talking Spanish treasure, French treasure. Now it's pirate treasure. Yeah, but this was one of the earliest bastions of Judaism too in the Americas, was Port Royal. There's a great book by Ed Kritzler called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. Really, really interesting. He's a Jewish man, you know, he's religious, and really good book. Really, really cool stuff. I've got a video on that too, the hidden Jewish history of America, of Florida and America. But they say this was the storehouse and treasury of the West Indies, and also known as the wickedest city in the world, is how it was known before the tsunami and earthquake happened.
Yeah, it's funny because I was looking at those final degrees of Neptune and Pisces in 1699 before it goes into Aries the following year. And one of the events on July 6th, Scottish-born pirate captain William Kidd is arrested and imprisoned in Boston, province of Massachusetts Bay, after being tricked by his former patron, New York Governor Richard Coote, the first Earl of Bellamont. So you're seeing the end of this pirate reign, right? When we go into these final sort of degrees of Neptune and Pisces, that's really fascinating. And this something new like emerges, right? Like Neptune and Aries, you know, we're moving into sort of in some ways more land-based material. So we're talking like 1700, and you know, we're you know, kind of on our way to ultimately the American Revolution. So this is fascinating. This whole thing with what happened there during that time, that year, and that by the end of the 1600s, they're wrapping it up. Neptune and Pisces and the whole piracy game is kind of on its way out. That's really fascinating.
Hell yeah. And also that tectonic plate is the same one that goes over into the Yucatan. So you know, this could even be, you could say like an aftershock of the Atlantean, you know, the great Atlantean deluge or earthquake, you know, who knows?
So okay, let's talk about the Jewish pirates. Are these guys, are they like are they Sephardic Jews from Israel, Spain? Is that where they're coming from?
Yeah, for the most part. This is a big chunk of American history and a big chunk of Florida history that doesn't really get the attention it deserves. The Spanish were the first to kind of, you know, settle the Caribbean and the Americas as we know it. The French were not far behind. There was a couple others. The Dutch, you know, not far behind. Well, the Spanish, the context, right, the setting for when the Age of Discovery happened, you know, Columbus and onward, 1492, onward to 1692, you know, pretty much the Age of Discovery. That is also the Spanish Inquisition.
Right.
You know, without the Spanish Inquisition, there is no impetus to go race off to the Americas. You know, they knew it was there. Everyone knew the Americas was there. It was just a dangerous legend, you know. Yeah, if you got the balls, you can make it over. You know, if you hug the ice up to the north, you could make it over, and that was a safer bet.
Yeah.
But doing a straight shot across the Atlantic, you know, only a couple of the most skilled pilots were doing that. Columbus got his hand on an Irishman who helped him do that voyage. But what was the impetus? It was the Inquisition. You know, these weren't just Spaniards looking for gold. You know, most of these guys never made it back on these voyages, you know?
Right.
So the whole fortune and fame thing it's kind of a far cry from what it was actually like. But why they were leaving was they were getting kicked out of Spain. They were getting, you had conversos, you know, you had the Anusim, the Jews who were forced to convert to Catholicism. And that was okay for, you know, a long period of time until 1492, when the Moors are fully expelled from Spain.
Yeah.
Then you get the Inquisition, where they're like, okay, the Moors are gone.
Right.
Now who are we going after? Now we have to clean up shop. And they went after not only, that's quite why it's called Inquisition. They weren't just saying, oh, you're a Jew, you're in trouble. It was, well, we're all Catholic. Everyone's pretending to be Catholic, but let's figure out who's actually Catholic.
Right. There were people who were semi like esoteric in their Catholic beliefs that they also went after somewhere up in the north. It's a very interesting period. And that they would actually try to trick these people to see if they were really truly Catholic. They had all these things set up for them. Like it's kind of a wild part of history. It's like, okay, let's really test their faith.
Yeah. And just the way that history panned out up until then was the Jews were the most gifted navigators and the most gifted portsmiths and port traders. They knew how to harbor merchandise. They knew how to, they were typically multilingual. They were typically well-versed in navigation because of their culture, however they had got by up until then. And pretty much those are the ingredients that you need to become a pirate. And they ended up becoming pirates once they go over to the Caribbean, and they start doing so well for themselves. They say, well, what the hell? We don't need to answer to we don't need to pretend to be Christian anymore just to have the protection of Spain. If we have a ship, if we have enough men, we can go on our own on the Caribbean. And this is also where you get a lot of the Jewish Native Americans, where many of them would reinvent themselves as pirates because it was easier to get by in the Caribbean, flying your own flag than someone else's. But also, if their ship gets wrecked, ship sinks from underneath them, what would they do? They'd go to shore and they'd become Indians. They'd become Native Americans. They would just say, all right, chief, we can trade from the coast, and that's really how it went. A lot of the time, the Jews were some of the first to trade with the Native Americans. They were able to get closer to them because of the affinity, the similarity between their customs. But you asked, were they Sephardic? Yes. Most of them were North African, Syrian, Italian, Spanish, Mediterranean Jews who were sick of pretending to be Christian or were already good Christians, many times forgot that they were Jewish. And the Vatican found out for them, reminded them that their family was Jewish and said, oh, hey, by the way, we found out your family's Jewish. Now you're in trouble. Right.
So who was king back then? Wasn't it Ferdinand? Wasn't Ferdinand king during that time?
There was Ferdinand and Isabella.
Right. Yeah. And they actually had a rift with the Vatican around a lot of the Inquisition stuff. I remember reading about that. It was like there was definitely a major disconnect between those two in terms of the papacy and how this is all getting sorted out.
Yes. That actually Isabella and Ferdinand's their daughter, their son, Charles I of Spain, would end up assuming the role of Holy Roman emperor. Pretty much. So that was the thing, is they didn't want Ferdinand or Isabella to kind of wield that power on their own, but they brought together Aragon and Castile, I believe, which was why their union was so important. Right. And that's how they were able to kick out the Moors. The Inquisition led to people hightailing it to the Caribbean. Many times Muslims hiding from further persecution, Jews hiding from persecution, a lot of black people, a lot of slaves, negritos, mulattoes.
This is all very Piscean as well, right? Because we're talking about religion, and we're talking about scapegoats, and people having to essentially go on some kind of, I would say forced pilgrimage of sorts.
Yes.
Right. So this is all very Piscean.
Absolutely, because these pirate ships, they were actually vessels for religious freedom. Okay. They were very often rabbis. I'm not even kidding. Go read Ed Kritzler's books, guys, if you don't believe me. Some of America's earliest rabbis were pirates. They were pirate captains. And also, guys, Redbeard, Barbarossa. Has anyone ever seen his pirate flag?
It's a Star of David.
It's a Star of David. And yeah, so his second in command was Jewish also. So, just in North Africa, we have, Jews will be the first people to tell you that they have a rich history of privateering, that they largely pioneered the industry. They're the proto-Semitic people, like the Phoenicians, were the original pirates, and they kind of carry that legacy on to today a little bit. In the Caribbean, they were setting up shop in places like Jamaica, where they could do whatever the hell they wanted. They could be as, they could do as much synagogue service as they wanted. They could marry whoever they wanted. And that's what piracy was all about, the freedom to be Jewish, the freedom to be a Kabbalist, black magician, skull and bones insignia, all that stuff was, that was all mystical. That was kind of, it was the same thing as the Pilgrims coming over. What forces someone to go so far on such a dangerous mission? Religion.
Yeah, interesting. So, have you been able to trace back, sort of the North African, sort of Assyrian, or those roots, those mariner roots to like the sea people? Have you ever taken that journey into the realm of the sea people?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. What we call the Phoenicians today, wasn't the Phoenician Empire until the time of the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. The Phoenicians made it up until the Roman Empire, right? And then their descendants became the Venetians, right? The Venetians in the East Mediterranean. Phoenician. But the original Phoenicians, we don't know much about them at all. Not much at all.
Right.
Very, very little. Later towards Carthage, we know a lot about Carthage. But who settled that landmass? Who made that colony? If that's their colony, where's their homeland? They like for us to believe that it's Israel, that it's the Levant, the coast of Lebanon and the East Mediterranean.
Right.
But that is such a small landmass. There's no way they could be producing that many people, that much wood to build that many boats. There's just not a chance in hell. Okay.
Right.
I think, and a lot of more open-minded, kind of people who are into ancient history, who like looking at linguistics and old mythology, to me, everything points north. I think that the original Phoenicians were Finnish. Finnish, yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, that the Finns were the Phoenicians. And this is why Phoenician means phonetic. They invented the phonetic alphabet. We, the Greeks, the Jews, they all get their phonetic alphabet from the Phoenician alphabet. The Phoenicians invented the phonetic alphabet. One letter equals one sound. That's a Phoenician invention, right? And Hebrew comes out of that. Greek comes out of that. Well, we don't know where Phoenician really originated. It just kind of pops up. They say, oh, Etruscan, there was some stuff around the Mediterranean.
Right.
But when we look at the European runes, runes, those look just like Phoenician script. Sometimes it's sometimes backwards, sometimes upside down, but it's the same characters.
So
Now,
you think the migration is north south is what you're saying?
yes, trickle down anthropology is what I'd call it.
Right.
And that the sea people, to your question, the sea people are said to be earlier than the Egyptians, because the Egyptians had kind of been afraid of them ever since, as far back as we go in Egyptian history. They had a threat of the sea peoples coming in from the oceans.
The sea peoples were brutal. They were savages,
Mm-hmm.
and they were the destroyers of civilizations, man.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they didn't do much talking or explaining themselves, but we're told that they were tall, that they were big, that they looked like they were from somewhere else. They interfaced so little with the existing empires we kind of know today that we don't even really have a name for them. They just say the sea peoples. Now it's generally agreed upon that this people is what would become the Phoenicians, what would be kind of more consistently remembered as the Phoenicians. But these are, you could say, proto-Phoenicians, pre-Phoenician seafaring people. They terrorized Egypt, they terrorized the Levant, and they were feared. Now,
you can see this map right here. Can you see this on the screen?
Yeah.
These are their routes. These are all the various places that they came in and absolutely just devastated and plundered. And then the strange and enigmatic part about the whole sea people mythology is that they theoretically go away, right? It's just it's wild. They come in and they flash on sort of the end of like the Bronze Age, and they're feared. And then what happens to them? Like, where do they go?
Yeah, the sea people, it's a mystery. And I think that a large part of that mystery is that our academic establishment refuses to admit or concede that there is a connection between ancient Norse seafarers or ancient Finnish seafarers and these proto-Semitic seafarers. I think the evidence is concrete. I'm convinced that written language as we know it came from the north down to the Mediterranean.
Right.
The Etruscans, Rus is what many of these pre-Viking, Scandinavian people called themselves. The Rus, the red people. The Phoenicians,
right.
Red, painted themselves red, maybe. The Etruscans painted themselves red, right? Also, what was so much of this over was the red dye that the Phoenicians built their empire off of. That was one of the most red, purple, blue, but the dyes that they built their empire off of, they wanted to keep all this secret. A lot of people didn't even know the origin of the dyes. The Phoenicians kept all this such a good secret. So, number one, they're guarding their own trade routes. They're protecting their own history and protecting their history. They don't want people to steal their trade routes. So we shouldn't expect to find much written down in history, but also I think that the academic establishment won't entertain anything that points to Northern Europe. Therefore, we're left with very little to go off of. There are Phoenician artifacts found in Scandinavia, in the water, in the ocean. There's there's Phoenician oil lamps that have been found up near Finland, off the coast of Finland. So Finns, who are historically known as great seafarers, people say, oh, the Finnish weren't Vikings. Not true. That's not true. They were actually some of the earliest Vikings, pre-Viking, right? They were doing Viking stuff. They just kept more to themselves, right? The Finns largely peopled Ireland too.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Finn with a double N, Finn,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That's one of the largest groups, stocks in Ireland is the Finns. And so to this day, Finn is one of the most common names in Ireland. And to me, Finland is the grand finale. It's the finish line.
Mhm.
It is the final. It's the finial, the tippy top of the pyramid. It's the tippy top of planet Earth.
Mhm.
I think that the magnetic north once rested over Helsinki, Finland,
Right.
and that's where you get hell freezing over and Atlantis sinking.
Right. Right.
Helsinki.
Helsinki. Interesting.
And the E is the axis of the North Pole, from the North Pole to the Pole Star.
Right.
And also, what set the Phoenicians apart from the Greeks and the Romans? The Greeks and the Romans were like little kids. They were stuck in a kiddie pool. The Phoenicians blockaded the Straits of Gibraltar. You couldn't get out of the Mediterranean, with a warship or anything. So the Greeks and the Romans, they did their little thing. They thought they were so mighty, but they were just in the little kiddie pool that the Phoenicians allowed them to play in. The Phoenicians were navigating the Atlantic Ocean. And how could they do this? The Greeks and the Romans, largely, not entirely, but most of what we know of Greek and Roman seafaring history, they wouldn't even leave the coastline. They would stay within view of the coastline. You'd be mad to go away from the coastline. Whereas the Phoenicians and the Vikings, here's a big link. They were able to cross the open Atlantic, the open seas at night. Not only the Greeks and the Romans, they didn't like to sail at night unless they really had to, unless they'd keep the coastline with all the lighthouses and the fires. You'd see it all. But the Phoenicians were masters of astrology, masters of astronomy. An average Phoenician man was put through rigorous initiations and testing for him to be able to tell the stars with the naked eye.
Right.
They also had early kind of astrolabes and gyroscopes and things like that. They had, early prehistoric versions of those, but they knew the stars well. And how do you get to know the stars well? How? Yes, you can get pretty good learning astrology in Florida or the Mediterranean. But if you really want to get good at astrology, if you really want to get good at astronomy and, marking, identifying these stars with the naked eye, being as close to the North Pole is going to make that job easier and easier. As close as you can get to the North Pole, you're going to get more and more of an unobstructed view of all the constellations in the northern hemisphere, the northern sky. The closer you are to the equator, the more you're going to have to kind of take what you can get, right? You're only going to get as much of the sky as the seasons will allow you, so to speak.
Yeah. Up in the north, you're like in this planetarium, right?
Yep.
Like
exactly.
Yeah.
That's what symbols like the swaz T. I can't say it. I can't say it quick, or I'll get in trouble. But that symbol, the sun wheel, whatever you want to call it, is a Arctic symbol. And you've done shows with Mario.
Yeah.
Mario Garza. He hits a lot of home runs talking about the Arctic polar centric symbolism that kind of is at the foundation of a lot of occult symbolism. It's all pointing to the North Pole, right? Hyperborea, right? And to me, that is the big secret. I'm all into the Garden of Eden, but I'll only entertain 2 locations for the Garden of Eden. It was either in Florida or the original one was at the North Pole. I think the human race, at least one of the races, came out of the North Pole, originated in the North Pole. I believe European people are tailor-made to living in Arctic or polar conditions. like a polar bear, like a husky, you know, blonde hair, and blue eyes, and things like that. And the Phoenicians, we don't know what they look like a ton, but we know what the Etruscans looked like. The Etruscans depicted themselves as blonde, blue-eyed, Arctic features, you know. They didn't look like Egyptians, not at all, not even close. They had a fully developed, you know, frontal lobe. They looked like they looked like SS propaganda. They looked like super soldiers.
Okay, so they looked like the guys that really should have been in Hitler's Luftwaffe versus those other guys that looked like rodents, right? I mean, if you think about it, like if you look at like Himmler and Goering and all these characters, you know, that surrounded Hitler, none of them really looked like the, you know, the Aryan ideal. And I thought to myself, this is quite interesting. Like, why don't they have like a Rutger Hauer kind of guy, or you know, or a, you know, cabinet of Rutger Hauer types? If anything, those guys that surrounded Hitler looked like the antithesis of that. And most of them, by the way, didn't look all that healthy either. But that's just my observation.
I mean, man, they were a bunch of hippie vegetarians. They were probably all B12 deficient. Just the B12 deficiency is what lost them the war. Okay, it was good old steak versus the German vegetarian.
No, but I just thought it was interesting. It's like, okay, you're selling this program, right? And none of these guys look like the program. I'm sorry, it just didn't, you know, it just didn't flesh out that way.
We got to remember, yes, you're right. Like, we do kind of remember World War II Germany as like this Aryan, you know, experiment. It was actually, it was kind of far from that. That spark was the reaction to the influx of refugees, millions and millions of refugees from places like Austria, Serbia, you know, Southeastern Europe, you know, Baltic Slavs. All these people were going just like Mexicans and Nicaraguans are flooding into America. These people were flooding into Germany for years and years and years. So yes, Robert, we're not seeing the original German kind of phenotype shining at World War II. We're seeing the disgruntled populace saying, we want our original German, you know, phenotype back, is what they're kind of saying. They're not saying we are, look at us, we're the example of it. It was kind of like, guys, look at us. We can't keep going on like this. You know, we've got to go back to German.
Right. I was just looking at this period, these last couple of periods of the final like days of Neptune and Pisces. So you go back to that period in 1699, right? The whole pirate thing is starting to fall apart, right? Like it's completely. They're getting tried. They're going to jail. Like it's kind of over. If you go to 1860, that's 1 year before the Civil War, right? So what's on the table during that period, right? Theoretically, it's slavery, which is in some ways connected to piracy and human trafficking and the whole nine, right? So both of these sort of like Neptune transits from Pisces to Aries bring this thing up that has to be looked at and kind of dealt with. And then on the other side, there's sort of this major reform that begins to happen. And I'm thinking about right now where we have Neptune and Pisces and sort of the final days of it. And, you know, you have Elon Musk and Trump starting to go through all the corruption, right? With the, you know, with the Doge and, you know, trying to figure out where all this money is going and where it's being spent and US aid. And some of it may be just completely performative. But on the other hand, it is also mirroring in some ways something similar to what was going on in these other periods. Plus, on top of that, there's always the sort of this sort of backstory or this narrative of human trafficking still going on right now to this day. right? So I think it's really interesting. And if we can look back in the past and see these periods that are kind of in flux, and then we see where Neptune moves into Aries, there's a very different kind of like trend or morality
Yes.
or an attempt to kind of, right the ship in some ways.
Totally.
So this is interesting.
Also, what you just said made me think of. I did the math in my head. The Neptunian cycle is like 160 years, roughly around there.
Yeah, it's 15 times 12, right?
Right. So 160, give or take. Let's take the Port Royal earthquake and add 160 years to that. You're pretty much looking at when the 164 years is what it says for the Neptune cycle. If we add 164 to 1692, we pretty much get the beginning of the American Civil War.
Right. That's it. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Totally. That's why it's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on tonight, to explore this Atlantean thing in Florida, but the Piscean thing is huge. Yeah.
And Florida, we've talked about this before on your show. Florida is Pisces. Everything from its name, our birthday today Florida is March 3rd. Well, that's 1821 or so. If we go, or 1845, if we go back to Juan Ponce de Leon actually set out for Florida on March 3rd too. And he landed, he came to Florida on Easter, right? And named it Florida for Easter. That's the Pascua Florida, the flowery festival. But there's a double meaning here. What was he looking for? The fountain of youth.
Right.
I think the fountain of youth is like a Pisces concept. It's the fountain, Pisces going into maybe shifting into Aries, youth, newborn baby.
Absolutely.
That cusp there is roughly when the cusp between Pisces and Aries roughly is when Florida was kind of first settled or explored. And he named it Florida.
Right.
I'm into words. I love words. I think they tell us everything.
Absolutely.
That's why God made Adam, was to name his creation, to use Adam's linguistics, to give meaning to his creation. Etymology is etymology too.
Right.
Florida, it's flowery. That's what it means. But flor also means in the flower of one's youth, was a common Spanish expression, still is today. To say the flower means you're the prime of your life. I'm in the prime of my life. I'm in the flower of my life. Right. So when you're naming Florida, he's saying it's a land of youth, a land of life. But then also Florida, floor. This is down on the floor. It's flat.
Right.
It's floor.
Right.
It's
a very
well watered.
It's a flat place. There's
that's Pisces.
Right.
It's the feet. What's Florida also known as? The boot. The boot.
Yeah.
I think it was Andrew Jackson who said, I could be wrong on that. Check me, guys. One of Jackson's buddies or his opponents said, America needs Florida like the body needs a foot. Because they were trying to get Florida to become a state back then.
Right.
And they said Florida is the foot of America. And then you look at Florida, you can flip it upside down. Have you ever seen those bumper stickers in Florida where it's got the cowboy boot as Florida? Cowboy, or Florida makes a cowboy boot. Go look at Italy. Italy's the same thing. It's the boot.
Yeah.
Florida, the same angle and pretty much the same length as Italy too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Key West and Sicily,
Yeah. When I was in Puerto Rico, we went to this hot spring in Puerto Rico. It's the only hot spring in Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that it is sort of downstream from a place called Ponce. And that's where the actual spring at this hot spring that we were at starts. So it starts in Ponce, Puerto Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's interesting, right? Now we have this town in Puerto Rico named Ponce de Leon, looking for the fountain of youth. And, who knows, right? I don't think I was sitting in the fountain of youth, but it was fascinating to, make that correlation because they named that place after Ponce. And that's exactly what it was about, right? These waters, these healing waters. So, yeah.
100%. And also, Ponce de Leon was the governor of Puerto Rico for a time.
Yeah.
And he was about to lose that job, which is why he ended up going over to Florida to try and look for something better.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, so we have Florida, we have Atlantis, right? And we have Pisces and this convergence. And one of the things that I was looking at was on 2011, we had Fukushima. And Fukushima, I think, was an incredibly important event and happening that a lot of people have just kind of slept on and forgot about. And so one of the things that was literally some fallout from Fukushima, but something else I think happened during that time. If you go back and you look at it, I'll bring the chart up here for Fukushima. It's just about the time that Neptune is about to go into Pisces.
Oh.
It is right at the edge of Pisces. So let me bring the Fukushima charts up. Okay, so this is, let's see one more here. All right, so let me bring it up here. All right, so this is 2011, and I have it at 8 a.m. Actually, it was later that day, but this will give you an idea. So what we're looking at here is let's leave it this way. So here's Uranus. So this is when Uranus. So there are two Uranus cycles inside of one Neptune cycle. So Uranus will change signs twice during the net. So you can see Neptune here, and it is at 29 Aquarius, and this will move into Pisces by I believe the 5th of April. So it's not that far away. But this Uranus will change signs the very next day. So this is what happens on 3/11/11, and I'll show you the other. Let's see what we have here. So this is the day after, right? This is just the day after, and the day after you can see Uranus has changed signs. So literally, what happens is that Fukushima it doesn't trigger because we know Uranus is going to go into Aries, like that's going to happen. But it goes into Aries right on the heels of this major seismic event. And so we get 7 years worth of Uranus and Aries. And then if we go here, and this is by April 11th, you'll see that Neptune has finally gone, well, it doesn't take that long, but now it's in Pisces. So we have Uranus and Aries and Neptune in Pisces. And it's all triggered literally by Fukushima. And I'd love your feedback on this. I brought this up at the beginning of the show while you were getting ready to jump on. This whole idea of like ancient history and ancient civilization, and there were things that were here before we were. I mean, it was always kind of in the air, but this whole idea of what people call Tartaria, and all those strange and unexplainable things like melted buildings and antiquitech and all the stuff that, for better or worse, we've taken in and said, like, this is a really interesting part of our history nobody's really talking about, and almost an entire mythology has come out around this, and it wasn't happening before 2011, right? This was not happening. People were not they were not looking in this direction before. I mean, they were, but it wasn't like, you had an assemblage of YouTube channels that were trying to uncover, this building that was sunk between, but I don't know, the surface and who knows how many layers of earth, then excavated out. So my feeling is that when you have these major cyclical changes, like what happened here with Fukushima, it cracked something open, right? Because Aries is all about being a pioneer, right, and finding things that weren't there before, and exploring this kind of new territory and new terrain.
Yeah.
And
Also,
I really feel like that on the heels of this thing happening with Fukushima, this whole exploration, which you're a part of in your own way and through your own peregrinations, really begins to happen. It doesn't happen before this. And it's also connected to the shift of Neptune as well, moving into Pisces, because it also takes us into the dream, right? And what's possible or what's impossible when people begin to, sort of dive into that territory. And so we're getting ready again. Like, we are getting ready again to have these very seismic shifts, right? Neptune's going to move into Aries, which you just talked about. And then Uranus went into Taurus in 2020. And what happens then? It's like, actually, it was in I take it back, 2019. What happens then? Well, about a year later, we're dealing with COVID. And this kind of what I would call a deconstruction, because this is what happens when Uranus goes into Taurus. So it's another one of these sub-cycles. But even then, like, we're still dealing with kind of excavating this this part of our history. Taurus represents the earth, and Uranus is like, okay, well, here's a radical reappraisal of what was once, before a time that we theoretically either existed or recorded it. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because we seem to be in this throes of another reset, obviously, whatever this version of it is. But I'm wondering if you think that as we move into this new kind of astrological phase, and especially with Uranus and Gemini, where things are going to happen very, very quickly, like at light speed, do you think that we're going to get kind of more answers from this kind of antediluvian past, or, this kind of, Tartarian sort of world that we were in? Or do you think we're going to just move so quickly into whatever the future is that it's not going to really mean a lot? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's culturally relevant right now. Every celebrity is talking, not every, but so many celebrities are talking about Tartaria, right? And there's a lot of Tartaria that I don't, that I'm not on board with, right? But it really is the new Atlantis.
Right.
What does that mean? It's like, even if this has nothing to do with Atlantis, well, 500 years ago, you called it Atlantis because that was the ballpark that everyone came to play with ideas about ancient history and the ancient past. Everyone had to come to the kind of Atlantis meeting point, right? Even if it, for example, before this 2011 shift, like Robert's talking about, anything that you found around the world that was ancient or mysterious, boom, Atlantis.
Right.
It's Atlantis. It doesn't matter if it's Japan, Peru, you found it, it's mysterious, it's megalithic, unexplained. People said Atlantis. Today, I understand people don't like how the word Tartaria is used today, but we just kind of got to ride the wave and accept this is the new Atlantis. It's okay if this is the umbrella term that every kind of unaccounted for conspiracy theory gets thrown under, as long as it gets sorted out eventually. Sorry, screaming babies. I'm okay with it. I like where it's headed. I think we can look towards more truth, as naive as it sounds. I think the truth is coming out at an accelerating rate. People are more comfortable with it. They're more comfortable hearing things like Tartaria on like Tom Green just did a comedy special, and a good like 2 minutes or 3 minutes of his set is about Tartaria, and
Right.
he was married to Drew Barrymore, that like he's in with the NPCs, he kind of was like the brainless, dumb stoner, from the 90s. He's a smart guy, I like him now, but he's into it. It made it to Joe Rogan. It made it. Tucker Carlson's talking about this. Donald Trump's making executive orders that say no more brutalism on government-funded buildings. We're not going to have it. So I see the evidence. I see the kind of the writing on the wall. I think Tartaria is a net positive for the conspiracy community. It's okay if there's a lot of nonsense thrown up in there too. That's how Atlantis was. I love Atlantis. And there will be something that comes after Tartaria, which I think what Robert's kind of pointing at, that will give more context and strip away the things that had nothing to do with that, because that's kind of what Tartaria did for Atlantis, right?
Yeah.
Atlantis is kind of pure again, if that makes sense. Like the conjecture and the hypotheses are getting thrown at Tartaria now instead.
Right.
And something will come after the whole Tartaria movement. But I think we're judging off how long the kind of Atlantis phase went for. I'd say we can look at Tartaria being here to stay for our lifetimes. I think is going to be the new Atlantis. But I could be wrong.
Well, no, it feels that way. And these Uranian shifts, particularly with Neptune and Pisces, which is all about collective imagination, right? And that's what it does. It captures people's imagination. And it's like, oh, well, this is the new Atlantis, or this was, quite possibly some version of Eden, or whatever they want to type it or describe it as. I wanted to ask you about another kind of Floridian concept here, and I'm sure we're going to have a similar take on our conversation wise, but it also sort of morphs into this other discussion where I think things are ultimately going to move, and this is the whole thing that happened in Gulf Breeze, Florida, right, with the UFO sightings, and it was. Eventually, do you want to tell people about? I don't want to break it down too much, right? Do you know about Gulf Breeze, right?
A little bit. I haven't covered it on my channel a lot, but yeah, my brother talks about it. Actually, I heard it from my brother.
So I think it was a LARP, but does your brother think it's a LARP as well?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not very familiar, but fill us in.
Well, so there was a series of UFO sightings in Gulf Breeze, which is kind of up near Tallahassee, that area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a guy who was able to capture some what looked to be like UFOs on a fairly consistent basis, and he was able to get the local newspaper to write stories about these UFOs. And for a long time, it was, it became a thing. Like people would go outside and they would try to, see these things. I think it was like, I think it was in the 70s. And eventually, after a very long period of time, they found the house that the guy lived in, and somebody was doing some kind of redecorating in the house. And they found a panel that was kind of hidden, and then they found a bunch of stuff that looked like it could be used for like UFO models or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so for the longest time, it was pretty unexplainable, but there seems to have been some kind of resolution around. But it was one of the most famous kind of unexplained UFO sightings in the country. It was connected to Florida. So I think we're going to have more of these, UAP, whatever you want to call them. I feel like these things are going to happen, and we're going to see more of them. And whether or not they're based on the government, or who knows where this stuff is going to emerge from. But I think it's coming. I think we're going to have to deal with it. And we're going to have to deal with it, I would say, within the next year to two. And so I'm wondering, based on, your research on Florida, besides Gulf Breeze, if you've run across a history of these sightings in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, totally. A couple nights ago, we were dunking on Stephen Greer for a good portion of the night.
Right.
He actually is accused of faking a UFO sighting off the coast of Jupiter. He allegedly hired a plane to drop a flare out over the ocean where they were doing one of these circles, like gatherings, to call in UFOs. But that was, he's kind of a fraudster. I don't like Stephen Greer.
He's a freak, man. That guy's a freak. Yeah.
We're talking about him being a reptilian a couple nights ago.
He looks the part.
He's like damage control. He's like Men in Black damage control. He's like, it is a alien masquerading as a humanoid, being the ultimate gatekeeper on alien endeavors. But I want to bring up the crest view. I don't know much about the Gulf Breeze incident, but I do know a little bit about an incident called the Crest View Elementary School sighting. That was near Miami, a suburb of Miami, Opelika, Florida, I believe. And the teacher, there's a number of teachers and a bunch of students. Okay, we're talking dozens and dozens of people. The initial sighting was only a handful of people. One teacher and a handful of students, I believe. Then they kept having more and more sightings. This was an ongoing thing. Eventually, they would have 300 people seeing the same thing at once, all recorded. Everyone's, the whole neighborhood's there. This is not some, hard to believe kind of, oh, my one friend told me and then I told someone else. This was 300 people at a school. These people at their job. They can't just be making shit up for no reason. And they saw what they said were long cigar-shaped UFOs that were able to kind of make, anomalous movements. And like I said, 200 girls and boys at once. So 200 kids, not to mention all the adults around.
Right.
So all the teachers, got to be at least a dozen teachers at the school, dozens of adults around, and they would have anniversary sightings. So they would go to the site a year later and see the same thing. This kind of community kind of kept together and kept trying to track this into the future. And they had good success. And this was a broad daylight sighting. Cigar-shaped UFOs. This is Crestview Elementary School, one of the most substantiated UFO sightings in American history. Nobody's saying this was a hoax. Nobody's saying this was this or that. The only thing that they say was that they were helicopters and that most people had never seen a helicopter before. That's the attempt at explaining this very, very large, witnessing of UFO.
So this happened. This happened in 1967.
1967, yeah.
Yeah, let's put it up here on the screen. So of course these are photoshopped in or whatever, but but here we go. This is so it was on the 6th of April, 1967. Fourth grade student Jonathan, while standing in the schoolyard during recess, would notice a strange object hovering over the schoolyard in North Dade County, Miami, Florida. Yeah. The object was quite away in the distance, but still close enough to see in detail. It was a round, disc-shaped craft which appeared to spin in the air and calmly and controlled. It was the end of the morning recess, and most of the other children were already inside. Fourth grade teacher, Mr. Robert Apfel, was busy calling the odd strangler in and to their next lesson, one of which was the now enthralled Jonathan. As Apfel walked over to the young boy, Jonathan turned to ask him while pointing upwards, "What is that?" Both teacher and student could see the metallic craft overhead. Neither knew what it was. And with all the other children now in school, they were the only two witnesses remaining. As they both looked upwards, the object vanished in a sudden white flash. Standing there for a moment to gather his thoughts, Apfel then ushered Jonathan inside. Although there were several military bases and airports in the vicinity, it wasn't an aerial craft either had seen before. Not at all sure what they had seen, neither expected to see such a sight again. The next day, however, the mysterious craft would return, and it wouldn't be alone. Wow. So here's what you're talking about. On April 7th, hundreds of witnesses, and this is the cigar-shaped craft right here. This time, there were two other cigar-shaped objects, and they were much closer to the school.
Mhm.
And all three objects vanished once again. That is wild.
Yeah.
So, and you say that they've come back to the school, like again and again, to sort of reenact this thing, or
Yeah, they did a year anniversary and maybe 2 or 5 year anniversaries, and they saw things. So
interesting. So, do you think that it was specific to the kid, the teacher, those kids? Why them? Why there?
I don't know. Opalaka is an experimental airport. It was founded largely out of, I don't want to say fraud, but mysterious kind of dubious circumstances. You have this guy named what's his name? George Curtis. I gotta look up his name. No shit, what is his name? Fuck. Someone in the chat's gonna remind me. Did these people know my content better than me now? What's his name? Glenn Curtis. I got it. I remember it before anyone reminded me. Glenn Curtis was one of the most interesting men to live through the 20th century. Glenn Curtis was a inventor. He helped invent and work on some of the earliest gas-powered motorcycles. One of the first guys to work on gas-powered airships. So I saw some of the comments, people saying, "Oh, that was just an airship. That was just a blimp." They didn't know. They knew what blimps were then. Okay, they'd been around for years, decades and decades. Blimps had been around since before World War One. Okay. They knew what blimps were. They knew what airships were. That's debunked, okay? But the airship, there's something to that, because the airship, the number one airship port, not an airport, they called it something else, Skyport or something like that, was Opelika, Florida. That was America's number one airship port. So when not the Hindenburg, but there's another, the Graf
Zeppelin.
Thank you. The Graf Zeppelin, it would go down to Opelika. That was its main kind of place to set up shop when it was in America. And yes, it would go up to New York and such, but Florida was America's number one airship.
So it was a place for them to dock and then kind of restock their helium.
Yeah,
got it.
And this airport was created, or at least made popular and overhauled, by Glenn Curtis, who only moved down to Florida because he had been disgraced in scandal in which the Smithsonian Institution was trying to rob the Wright brothers of their rightful, no pun intended, rightful patent on their technologies. Or not their patent, but the accolade of just being the first to flight. The Smithsonian and higher-ups in the Smithsonian were conspiring to dethrone the Wright brothers and to delegitimize their achievements and to say, "Oh, no, you stole that idea," or actually we had an earlier idea. And they tried to get Glenn Curtis and his friend to tried to gift them, what would the word be? that they had came before the Wright brothers.
the right to flight, right? I mean, it was really, yeah.
And so this was
Interesting.
one of the Smithsonian's earliest scandals, and it resulted in Glenn Curtis, who had up until then been a celebrated inventor. He was part of some of the earliest cameras, you know.
He worked for Eastman Kodak. He worked for Eastman Kodak.
Yeah, some of the earliest private cameras that people could buy, like Kodak. He was like a Renaissance man. You know, he was
on the cover. He was on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah, and he was a motorcycle rider too. So he not only was an inventor, he was also the pilot who would ride these experimental craft, and they'd either do that on the coasts of Florida, near Ormond Beach, where the sand is perfect. That's why, guys, we just had the Daytona 500. Why is Daytona where it is? Why'd they choose that? Well, now they use a track. 100 years ago, they just used the beach, because by Daytona and Ormond Beach, it has some of the flattest sand in the world. Flat and compact. You can take a motorcycle and do it 100 miles an hour, no problem. It's that flat on the shore, the beach line of Ormond Beach, Daytona. That's where we get the Daytona 500. It started out on the beach, then it got too big. They wanted to go longer, so they made a track. But it's where it is because of the compact sand that you can race on. So Glenn Curtis kind of got famous doing that. Inventions, motorcycles. Also, if you want to talk Tartaria and Antiquitech, I mean, my takeaway on Glenn Curtis, and he's considered one of the most influential Americans ever, not because people know his name, but because of his inventions and, you know, his contributions to how we commute today. He is really the guy, if you want to talk about Antiquitech and all this, you know, cars, water-powered cars, electric-powered cars. Glenn Curtis is the guy who took all these good ideas and made them dependent on gasoline. He was the one who pioneered and simplified the V8 and V6 engine to put on, you know, in the 1900s, they invented the electric car. They invented the electric bicycle. They invented the electric, you know, skateboard, Segway, you name it. They had it. Whether it was steam, whether it was pneumatic.
They had steam, absolutely, yeah.
On Jekyll Island, you can go to the Jekyll Island Museum and look at the dune buggies that they had. They're called like sand buggies or sand beetles or sand bugs or something like that. And those things, they're electric powered, silent, you know, pretty much silent, electric powered. You lay down low to the ground and you could zoom around at, you know, 30 miles an hour. It's like a golf cart they had it 100 years ago. They had 120 years ago almost in Jekyll Island. And you can see them in the museum. What happened was they needed to get everyone on roughly the same type of piston engine using the same gasoline so that the, you know, monopolists could keep doing what they were doing with the petroleum. And I'm not knocking petroleum. I'm just saying they needed it to be a cartel. They needed it to be a monopoly. You know, everyone's dependent on the same source of energy. Glenn Curtis was the greatest champion of that movement, to turn every good idea and slap a gasoline engine on it. You know, everything new and state of the art. Okay, well, that's actually, you know, it's not going to get anywhere unless we put their view was they weren't going to let anything make it to like the market, make it to the mainstream unless it had a gas engine on it. Glenn Curtis helped do that. It shouldn't surprise us he got caught up in the scandal with the Smithsonian. He's somewhat disgraced. He packs up and he moves. What do you do when you get a lawsuit? When you lose your lawsuit and, you know, you lose grace? You move to Florida. You know, that's
to Florida. Yeah, exactly.
Second chance. And what he did in Florida was he developed 3 cities from scratch: Opa-locka, Miami Springs, and there's one more I'm forgetting, but there's three suburbs of Miami. He created
Right.
them. Opa-locka is the Moorish wonderland of America. It has all these Moorish buildings. You know, the Shriners were active there. Now it's like a ghetto wasteland. But
Yeah.
that was what it was because of the airships. And Glenn Curtis had all the airships coming in. So just back to the UFO is, I think Opa-locka was kind of like the Area 51 of America in the 20s and onward until they got Area 51. Opa-locka Airport, Skyport, pretty much was the Area 51 of America. Glenn Curtis also worked on submarines, hovercrafts. He had hovercrafts that skimmed over the surface. He worked on, airships that would land at sea and things like that. But
So what's interesting is that in 1933, by an act of Congress, Curtis was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Right. So I think this was in some way to reward him for whatever his effort in flight was, but it wasn't like he couldn't dislodge the Wright brothers.
mm-hmm.
So it's like they gave him his own award. Right. And it was on March 1st, which brings us to where Pisces. Right. So it's another kind of Piscean sort of, tributary that's connected to this conversation, which again is sort of illusory, right? It's like, yeah, he did all these things, but he tried to wrest this thing from the Wright brothers, which doesn't work. And then I was, okay, we'll give you your own award, Glenn. Here you go.
Yeah. Right, and also Curtis and the Wright brothers, they ended up actually teaming up, or at least the people who bought the rights to their names did. Curtis Wright is pretty much the Wright brothers, their legacy kind of company, Curtis Wright. So, eventually they kind of ended up morphing together. But how did Glenn Curtis die, too? That's an interesting one. He actually...
This is appendicitis, but it's probably more than that, right?
Yeah, some people say it was a heartache, but appendicitis, it was something sudden. I believe he was in court when he died suddenly of mysterious circumstances.
Right.
What was Glenn Curtis?
It says he was traveling to Rochester to contest a lawsuit brought by former business partner August Herring.
Okay.
Herring, of course, a fish.
Yeah. So right? on his
Pisces.
way.
Yeah. And he suffered an attack of appendicitis in court. He died on July 23rd, 1930 in Buffalo, New York, complications of an appendectomy.
So on his way to court, not in court, but on his way to go testify, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Okay. All right. The guy seemed real healthy too, like he was daredevil athlete kind of guy,
he's an interesting character. He's also connected to Charles Olmsted as well. And Olmsted was the guy who I think invented one of the first applicable and navigable gliders. Right. So he eventually hooks up with him, I think, on the plane tip with engines. Fascinating character. He Opa-locka company as well, something that he started, his own company, the Opa-locka Thematic Resource Area.
Right.
Wow. It does look totally Moorish. It's got all these spires and sort of the onion domes and everything. Wow, that's wild.
When the Kellogg brothers moved into Florida, that's where they went, was Miami Springs. One of those cities that Curtis developed is where Kellogg put his other sanitarium. They had the Battle Creek Sanitarium, which was famous, healing center, whatever.
Yeah.
The number two to that installation was Miami. I forget the name of the Miami Sanitarium. I'll have to look it up.
So this was the train station of
Yeah,
Opa-locka at one point.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's totally crazy.
They call it the Kellogg Southern Sanitarium, I believe.
Look at that.
That's
wild.
Opa-locka. Yeah, that's all abandoned.
You know, and I'm telling you, man, like Florida is such a Piscean place because it has all these sort of rifts of imagination going on, right? Whatever that is, you know, that we just looked at. It's like, what the fuck is that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like Moorish land. And then, you know, I would say in a much more contemporary vein, you've got Disneyland and and you have Epcot. And just a lot of the stuff that, you know, that you've unearthed, literally and figuratively, it's all incredibly Piscean, right? Yes. It just sort of, you know, exists in this really interesting imaginal world, but it's really not, because there's a historical record to a lot of this stuff, and yet it seems quite fantastic at times as well. It's really interesting.
Oh yeah, I'll take interesting.
Yeah,
that's high praise.
All right, so the Florida Eden book, is that out now, or is it coming out soon?
Not out yet. Now we're shooting for April, May. But in the beginning by E.E. Calloway.
Whatever happened to that that HBO thing you were going to do? Did it ever like come about?
Yeah, it turned into a series that they call Florida Man or something. They just call it. Yeah. They weren't sure how they were going to format it when they reached out to me.
Right.
They were thinking that they were going to try and follow people around for a little while to see how they lived, to see like the weird niches of Florida life.
Right.
What they ended up doing was kind of more like a drunk history show. If you know drunk history, it's like where
I do. Yeah.
like one actor or someone, you know, famous or well-known tells a story, or at least how they recollect the story, even if it's wrong. And then they have actors kind of act it out like as with the narration. So like it's edited on top of the original narration. That's kind of, I haven't seen the show, but I think that's what they went with. And they kind of, it's more like lighthearted, like drunk stories, kind of like, oh man, that night was crazy, man. So that's kind of what the show turned into. Florida Man.
Did they use your material for that?
No. They were talking to me on the phone. It's called It's Florida Man, period. And that is an HBO show, and I talked to the two guys, you know, who were in charge of it, and they were asking me what Old World Florida is all about and how many people come to my meetups, and you know, like they wanted to come to a meetup and film and kind of splice in like my theories with the gathering and be like, oh, you know, this is this weird Florida community. And I think they just formatted the show differently. The way that they initially pitched it was they were going to like spend a week with me or something and like, you know, day in the life type of thing. And then that would either be a whole episode or like a whole, I don't know, a season or just an episode. And then the next thing would be a whole new person, you know, whole new story. Right. And they kind of did that, but it's more of like a story based, it's a story based show. So you can write in to this day with a story, and if it's good, they'll turn it into an episode. That's kind of the format of the show. But when they first talked to me, it was more about like culture and like communities in Florida. Now it's like, oh, this is a funny Florida man story. So,
sounds like they were kind of winging it and figuring it out as they went along. Yeah. I think hanging out with you would have been more interesting.
No, that when they called me, they were like, "Yeah, we want to come and hang out for a meetup," and I just burst out laughing. I was like, "Okay, like if you guys want, if HBO wants to come, you know, hang out, like we're just going to be smoking weed, like doing nothing really. But
Right. Yeah.
never panned out. But
Well, do you have anything else you want to add to our little Piscean excursion here tonight?
man, it's kind of a territory we've covered a little bit, but the whole KGC, Knights of the Golden Circle thing, really kind of weaves a lot of those pieces in together, fleshes out a lot of the details between piracy, civil war,
Right.
the mysticism behind the Confederacy all goes back to the KGC, and that all goes back to the slave trade too, the pirates, the early Caribbean settlers,
Right.
and also recently all of these new potential territorial acquisitions that America's potentially going to be adding, maybe Mexico or Canada or Greenland. This is very much in the vein of the KGC. And we brought up the move, Kentucky Fried Chicken moving, recentering to Texas.
Texas, yeah.
That's got like Civil War written all over it. You could kind of say that might sound funny or silly to some people, but I'd say, go look up the KGC, KFC, and I think it's no coincidence that their KFC is moving to Texas. Just like Elon Musk is moving to Texas, just like, all these Joe Rogan moved to Texas. Something's happening
Right.
around Texas. We talked about the eclipses Xing Texas over the last couple of years.
Right.
Yeah. That's all.
We should do that, and we should just like block off a couple hours to go there, because I know your people are familiar with it, and we have kind of a bit of a Venn diagram where worlds connect. So some of my people are familiar with it as well, but not everybody. So we should bring you back on and really dive into that, because it does connect what we're talking about here in a lot of ways. But I feel like if we go there, we'll be here for another 2.5 hours. And you've been working pretty hard this weekend, so you should probably like jump off and have an orange juice and a spliff and call it a night. Right?
Sounds like heaven.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's always great to have you on, and you're just an absolute wealth of knowledge amongst a lot of different things, but particularly Florida. And I just wanted to kind of dip our toes into this Piscean realm. And yeah, man, I before we go, I just want to get your thoughts on Trump before we get out of here. And what Joan sent me this text tonight. And she said that Trump DJs at Mar-a-Lago, which I've never heard before, right? Like Trump is like spinning at Mar-a-Lago. I don't know if that's true or not.
No,
but and that's a little hard to comprehend. But I want your thoughts. What do you think is going on? How do you think it's going? And where do you think it's going?
I love Donald Trump. I see the good in him. I'm hopeful. Donald Trump hopeful. I don't care if I'm a Trump tart. I'm a day one million Trump tart.
Right.
Okay. I think I'm fairly certain, since we're at the end of the show, I'll just let it rip.
Go,
here,
man.
Okay.
Go. Yeah.
I believe I'm fairly certain about. I think I know who I was in the past life. Okay. And I know for a fact that man, his last birthday was hosted by Donald Trump. By Donald Trump. He was introduced for his last birthday. He made it to 97. Introduced at his last birthday, or at least his last birthday party, by Donald Trump. I don't know. I think that I have a lifelong commitment and allegiance to Donald Trump. I almost can see no wrong. Okay.
Right.
Now with Israel and Palestine, that's the elephant in the room, that you've got to talk about. Warp speed didn't bother me one fucking bit. Didn't bother me one fucking bit. Anybody with an IQ over room temperature could see the writing on the wall, could hear the warnings out of Donald Trump's mouth over and over. Donald Trump, for 2 years. For 2 years. Okay, he ran on an anti-vax platform, and he took that through to the beginning of COVID. He said, don't take the V. We don't want Vs. They cause autism. It's bad. It's scary. We don't want to rush into that. Okay. But then, and again, this is, the 5D chess or whatever. People roll their eyes. Okay. I don't roll my eyes. Okay. I've parked cars on Palm Beach Island for, 4 years, before I started Old World Florida. I've met all these guys. I parked Jeb Bush's car. I've met many of Donald Trump's friends. Okay. They're not the Illuminati. They're not the Illuminati. Nothing even close. Okay. I think that there's a lot of, what do they say? Don't attribute to malice what you can to negligence, right? Or just like mismanagement or whatever. I love Trump. I love the direction we're going in. I think America needs to expand. People are saying, oh, we shouldn't be talking about taking territory. If you're not growing, you're shrinking.
Well, it's true. It's true. I agree with you.
Dying.
I agree with you.
I think that Donald Trump is clearly and obviously attracted to beautiful, hot, hetero women. That's like as much as you can ask for out of a leader at this point. Are you at least attracted to women of a consensual age? With Donald Trump, it's an obvious yes. I mean, you really think you'd go anywhere near a child with anything like that? You've got to be out of your mind. This guy bleeds red, hot. I love hot chicks. He wants beautiful women around him at all times. And I know that might sound misogynistic or whatever. No. That is as good of a reassurance as you can wish for today. Okay. That guy likes beautiful, good-looking women. You can't say the same for almost any politician. Look at their wives. They're dogs. Okay. They just have a wife who'll play ball, who'll let them, do this and that. I like Donald Trump. He loves beauty. He loves beautiful people. He did enough for me. I don't feel entitled to a spotless lamb of a leader. Why am I entitled to a spotless lamb of a leader? These conspiracy theorists are like spoiled little kids. What, you want your, we want our shamanic, you want your yoga teacher to be fucking president? Like, who's going to be president? You want them to be as spiritual as you, as wise as you, and you want
it's not going to happen.
And you want them to be a pit bull in the trenches, fighting.
Right. Yeah.
He's the man for the job. Get out of his way, people. Is he rubbing elbows with Israel more than I'm comfortable with? Yeah, I don't like it one bit. But what's the alternative?
Well, this is what I've brought up. Yeah. I brought this up, and it's like, yeah, what is the alternative? Do you want to turn it into a parking lot? Right? Is
he just going to say, oh, yeah, you're right. You know what, guys? You're right. Israel's the bad guy. Let's declare war on Israel. Let's see how that pans out.
Right.
No.
I listen, I actually thought that his thing with, a lot of people won't agree with me, but the thing that he did with Netanyahu in Gaza, I actually thought was genius.
Yeah.
I thought it was genius. Like, and I think he caught Netanyahu in a completely unaware moment. Right. Mm-hmm. Trump's talking about how they're going to develop it. And I know for a fact, Jared fucking Kushner was in that room. Mm-hmm. And when he was talking about developing it, Netanyahu would look at Kushner. He'd be like you'd be doing this, right? Like, it was mm-hmm. all really cool and chummy until Trump said, and we're going to own it. Right. And it was almost like this blast of like very intense air just like hit Netanyahu kind of in the gut. You went like, whoa. Right. And I thought, oh man, Trump is fucking with this guy.
Nobody did more to protect us from the V than Donnie J. Trump. Nobody did more to protect us from the V, and nobody did more to protect Palestinians than DJT. Okay. And let's be honest, okay? Let's hold these fucking Palestinian men accountable. If you're not a war-fighting man, you have no business in a war zone. Get your family, get out. These Palestinians think that they are winning the war by keeping their family in a direct missile launch zone. You know, the missiles are coming down. Get your family, get out of there. You're already living in third world conditions. You can't go migrate somewhere else. You can't go refugee.
I think that there's some problems with that.
Trump is saying enough of this has gone too far. You can't win that. You can't reset that position. You're getting stomped into oblivion. It's got to be done. He's pulling the plug. He's saying enough's enough. These Palestinians, they are abusing their kids. They are subjecting their kids to endless, and I know they're not the ones sending the missiles. I know this. But what the hell are you doing? They're trying to win a political victory, trying to win a social media victory by staying still where they are.
I think the problem is the relocation. That's been the problem. And I think Egypt has already taken on about 200,000 Palestinians already. And this is over the course of the years, right? So it's not like they haven't left. A lot of them have left. There are a lot of Palestinians in America, right? So it's not like there are Palestinians who have said, okay, this is where I want to spend the rest of my life and the rest of my children's lives. And I do think that some of them, I can't speak for all of them, but some of them are probably very prideful. Like, this is our land. We were here. Why should we be the ones that are being forced to leave? And I understand that argument. I do understand that argument. But unfortunately, the rest of the world has not supported them in that argument. And I say unfortunately with a big capital U, right? And now you have Trump coming in. And I think that, you know, one of the things that he does, and it's his sun Uranus conjunction in Gemini, and he'll start something, he'll get the ball rolling in one direction. Then all of a sudden, all these other things start to happen. And now all of a sudden, you know, Jordan is like talking to Trump, and, you know, and I do believe those people need a better place. I'm firmly, you know, with him on that. Then what happens after that, that's a whole other story. Right. That's a whole other story. And I think, you know, I want your thoughts on this before we get out of here too. I also think that Trump is creating, in some ways, a very sneaky two-state solution. Right. Because if the United States theoretically owns it, which is what he said, right, that's a state. Right. It's a state within a state. So all of these people that are looking to Israel to fulfill some sort of biblical prophecy and not have a two-state solution, in a weird way, Trump is about to create that, which also in a lot of ways distorts their prophecy, which they might not even be aware of. But I thought, wow, that's kind of an interesting chess move. You've just created a state within a state. And people said that would never happen. Like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. No, an American Gaza is a roadblock to Greater Israel. It kind of prevents Greater Israel. As long as that's,
I agree with you.
As long as that stays American, and I agree with you that Netanyahu, he whipped his head around like, what? Gaza is going to be American? It's like they hadn't prepped him for that. You know, Donald Trump kind of dropped that live, and you got to see almost their Netanyahu's honest reaction. I think Donald Trump is tough on both sides. People aren't used to that. People are used to people being weak on both sides, you know?
Right.
Donald Trump is tough as nails on both sides. He calls Palestine to this day. He calls Gaza to this day. He doesn't call it, you know, he recognizes the Palestinian people as a people who have a right to exist. And he'll say that right in front of Netanyahu. You know, no other Republican leader is gonna do that.
Yeah,
they're going to roll over and war.
Did you catch when he was saying, "Well, these people have to wake up and get shot at every day, right? And they have to have, you know, bombs and missiles coming out." I mean, like what he's describing is what they have to deal with the Israelis, right? That's what he's talking about, right in front of Netanyahu. And it's like, wow, yeah, you're right. They do have to do this. Yeah, you're not wrong about that.
And also, Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Go with the so also. I got one more for you.
I was gonna say, it's one thing you can't control who swarms around you. If you're a great white shark like Donald Trump is, you're gonna have a lot of remoras swimming around you trying to get the scraps. You know what I mean? And if these people, if we can compare them to remoras or parasites, kind of hanger-ons, that's how I see them. Is Trump's not hanging on to them; they're hanging on to him. They're following around the big, bright, productive show that's going around, city to city. They're just kind of latched on, taking what they can get. I see this as actually the Celtic people, the original Celtic people, like Trump's genetics. They are the original ancestors of modern day Jewish people. The Jews of today are Celts who've been around the whole world, mixed with every race, and came back to the Middle East. That's what Jews are. When they look at Donald Trump, they're seeing the original biblical phenotype. Donald Trump, if there is kind of like I don't want to say it, if there is like a hierarchy to groups of people or cultures, Celtic supersedes the Semitic way of life. And it's almost like they recognize that they are lower than Trump on the totem pole. And that's the reason they're around him. That's just kind of the way I see it, is they're subordinate to him. I believe.
Well, they certainly write about him in extremely glowing terms in Israel. To your point, my feeling about Trump, also with Netanyahu, is I think he wants to become more popular than Netanyahu in Israel. I think that's the plan. That's how he winds up supplanting Netanyahu. That what you're talking about converts itself into him overshadowing Netanyahu ultimately, right? And then that's sort of subsuming whatever kind of control or life support Netanyahu is on. Speaking of parasites, where are you with Elon Musk?
Yeah, see, everything good I said about Donald Trump, you can pretty much flip it and apply that to Elon Musk.
Right.
Can't stand him.
Right.
I can't stand him. I don't see any good that he's doing. I'm seeing all these posts. People are saying, I'm a Trump supporter. I just got fired. Because I guess my job was too cushy or something. You know what I mean? Instead of like their salary coming down, just job gone.
Right.
45-year-old white dude working a decent government job, axed.
Yeah.
Just because Elon Musk is trying to show that he's saving money. I think a lot of that's going to bite us in the back, but I also don't think Elon Musk's the one saving us any money. He's hired a team to do the work for him, just like he did with Tesla, just like he did with everything else. Right. I mean, there's no good ideas in that guy's head. Okay.
No, he's not an original thinker at all.
He's doughy. He's weak. He's uncomfortable in the limelight. He's nothing that a good leader or even a great thinker should be. Elon Musk, he's just bereft of intellect. I mean, he word salads his way through interviews. Worse than Kamala Harris. And people are like, "Oh wow, he's so pondersome." He's so like,
Well, he's on the spectrum. That's why he does that. That's his style of communication. Yeah. It's the spectrum.
It's like the emperor's new clothes. What do they call it? It's like Elon Musk diarrhea's out of his mouth, and everyone's like, "Bro, that was so insightful. Whoa, how he dumbed that down for us. Whoa, we're so grateful. Thank you, Elon Musk." I hate Elon Musk. I don't like him.
I'm on the same page with you. How long does the bromance last?
I don't think Donald Trump likes him at all, honestly. I don't think he even likes him. I think he just has him around because the left alienated billionaires. You know, they would like to have, they still are the billionaire, mindset is the leftist mindset. But Elon Musk, man, here's my other thing. Okay, we're letting it all fly right now. I think Elon Musk is an actual racist. He actually hates. I think this, my opinion, that he despises people with dark skin. Can't stand them. Go look for a picture of Elon Musk taking a photograph willingly with a black person. They almost don't exist. We know he was bullied in South Africa. We know that he hates, that he is open about anti-African policies. Now, hey, I might be right there with him for some of those conversations.
Right.
But with him, I sense a bitterness. I sense a disdain for humanity. He wants to upgrade us. He wants to cut off and genocide the people who are he'll see as irredeemables. I think he hates Africans. I think he hates black people in general, and I sense that from him. And I'm not very race sensitive at all, but I think he is as dirty of a racist as there's ever been. Go look for a picture of him hanging out with black people, like, yeah, this is my black friend. Yeah. Doesn't happen.
Right.
Doesn't happen. Everyone go look. He hates black people.
Vivek Ramaswamy is not black, but he's certainly dark skinned. And he wasn't going to share Doge with Vivek now, was he?
Right.
Because that was supposed to be the plan. I think you might have a point there. I hope the bromance breaks up sooner rather than later. And I've been really enjoying Steve Bannon's commentary on the whole thing. He hasn't held back at all.
Yeah, like
around Musk. So, well, this has been great. Dr. Longo, thanks for being here.
Anytime, Robert. Good stuff.
We'll get you back on with the KFC stuff, and I think it'll be interesting. And I think probably a good time to do that might be when we get a taste of that Neptune and Aries, right? That's the Civil War flavor.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, literally they do a siege on Fort Sumter. Neptune's at 29 Pisces. They surrender the next day. Neptune's at 0 Aries, and we're at war, right? So we're not that far away from Neptune going into Aries.
When is that?
We'll I should know this by heart by now. Give me a second. So what happens is we have these, we have the ingress, and then we have these retrogrades, and they don't really fully resolve themselves until 2026. But we go out this year, and last day of March, 31st of March, Neptune goes into Aries, 0 degrees. That is the Civil War degree. It's under the sign of Aries, 10 degrees Aries. That's where the sun is at that time. Chiron's at 22 Aries. So when that Neptune goes into Aries, we'll get you back on, because that'll be Civil War flavor, and that'll be a good time to do it.
Okay, I'm down.
All right, my friend. There he is, Dr. Longo. Go check him out, Old World of Florida, on YouTube. His store in Florida as well. And then, what is the name of your publishing company again?
GallowGlassBooks.shop.
Okay, there you go. All right. Thanks, my man. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks, chat. Have a good night.
All right. The great Dr. Longo taking us down into the whirlpool of Florida, Atlantis, and a little bit of Pisces along the way. I'll be back here Tuesday, with the Astro Weather. And I know some of you have been asking about Jasper. Yeah, here he is. He's in recovery mode. That's right. He's in recovery mode. He had a bit of a rough weekend, but I think he's back on the case. And thanks for all your concern and your queries about his well-being. And he's gotten a lot of pets along the way as well. All right. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe if you want to leave me a cup of coffee for tonight's show, that link is there. And if you want to sign up for a reading, purchase a reading, that's what I do. I enjoy doing it. Oh, by the way, I have a really interesting story before I go. It's really cool how astrology and media connect with people. And I had 2 instances of this happen this last week. And it was a shout out to the gals who brought this up. But one of them was telling me that she was watching Serious Sports with me and Al Dog last year. And she didn't know anything about sports, but she would listen to the show and she would bring up athletes' names and talk about them and their arm release and all kinds of stuff like that, right? And it was great because, you know, she was bonding with her son or grandson through Serious Sports. And then I got a phone call yesterday from somebody who wanted to set up a reading, and she said that her and her father actually listened to 15 Minutes of Flame and kind of bond around that. So it's really amazing, you know, kind of how this world works. And I know that a lot of YouTubers have a similar experience. I know Longo has his own version of this. And it just shows that we're in this really interesting interconnected world where we don't know where the content is going to go. We don't know how people are going to interface with it. We don't know how they're going to share it with other people or bond around it. But I think it's really interesting, and it really speaks to, in some ways, the veil behind the Aquarian age slowly being pulled back, and that we have these unique encounters and clustering where we're a lot more together than we thought we were. So that's it for tonight. I'll be back on Tuesday. Tartaria, you're the best. Mods, thank you. Subscribe, hit the like on the way out. Once again, thanks to Dr. Longo for being here tonight. God bless you all. Love you all. Bye for now.